Well, good afternoon. It's Dr. Kremens here. I wanted to talk about paper number 5, one of a few videos that I'm going to do on this essay. In this one, I'm going to focus just a little bit on the reading, how we're going to use paper number 4 with paper number 5, and also, most importantly, for this first video of the group that I'll do for this book and this last paper assignment, how to use the library database. You only need to find one article for this paper through the database. As I did for the last few papers, I've put the other new sources for paper number 5 up on Blackboard, but you are going to be finding a source from the database. So make sure you have a pen and paper ready, because I'm going to go through how to do that, how to use the database if you haven't done it before. If you have already used the database before, I know, for example, those of you that took me in English 101, we used it for this last 2 essays as we're using it for this one. You'll have some sense of how to use it, but I also want to show you which database we're using for this particular paper. So I'll do that in a couple of minutes. First thing I want to mention is that, as you probably noticed if you read the directions for paper number 5, it's our last paper for the class, not our final assignment though. So keep that in mind. We do have 2 other assignments. We'll do one more quiz, and then we also have that final revision assignment that I mentioned at the midterm. That's where you can go back and select one of the first 3 papers, or you can do a new topic, which we'll get to again in early May. But you'll have that option to revise one of those earlier papers we did from the first half of the semester for the last assignment of the class. So paper 5 is the last of the new papers for the class. And as you notice, it is based on not just Perfect Example, which we're using again, but also on Salon and the Inio Asano graphic novel that I mentioned over the past few weeks to make sure you got a copy of, so that you could be ready to read it for this last paper. Now, what I should mention about Solomon, as you probably noticed, if you've taken a look at it, is that it is printed as it would have been printed originally in Japan. So it's been translated into English, but unlike in English where we read from left to right, Japanese is read from right to left. And so that's why you'll notice you read the book basically in reverse. Okay, so you have to just adjust a little bit. It won't take you very long. It'll take you a couple of pages, but this is actually the front cover of the book. And so what you'll be noticing is, as you're reading from right to left. Okay, so let me give you an example. Let's say we opened up to, let's say this is the 3rd or 4th page of the book. As you're reading it, always be moving your eye across the page from the right-hand side to the left. So it's always like this. If you take a look at where my finger's pointing, here's the first blurb on this page, first caption, and then you move over here, and you move here, and then you keep moving basically in the mirror image of how you would read pages like this in English. Same thing over here. So you're moving from right to left, right to left, right to left. Okay. It'll take a little bit to get used to, but it's a really simple story. He's a really good artist and he paces really well. So just keep that in mind. So don't start the book as you would in English from the back, because then you'll just be reading the end, which you don't want to read it from the end to the beginning. I've never tried that. That'll be interesting. You may be asking yourself, why do they print it that way? Part of the reason for that is that the book was designed and drawn from right to left. So if you were going to convert it to the way we read in English, from left to right, it would throw off a lot of the drawings, and it would throw off the pacing of the way the drawings, they just wouldn't work well. You can try that, by the way, if you hold up a mirror to a page of this book and then you try to look at how it would read from the way we read from left to right, it wouldn't quite make sense. So that's why it's translated that way. And as I said, it's easy to get adjusted to. It does take a few pages. I know the first time I read a manga, which is the Japanese name for comics, translated into English in this way, it took me a few pages to adjust, but it won't take you long. And if you have any questions, excuse me, please make sure that you email to ask me, because I'm happy to help. But it just takes a few pages and you'll get adjusted to it. And it's a cool experience, by the way, because you'll get to see what it's like to read one of these Japanese comics in the original, how it is to read them or have that reading experience again from right to left as opposed to left to right. So just something to keep in mind as you're reading this and hopefully enjoying it for paper number 5. Now, the other thing that you're going to probably notice if you've read the directions for paper 5 is paper number 4 was the draft of paper 5. Yes. So they're totally connected. They're even more interconnected than papers 2 and 3 were, because we're using 4 as the foundation for 5, because what you're doing is you're taking the good material from paper number 4. And as I've been grading your papers, by the way, which you're going to get back to over the next couple of days, what I've been doing is I've been putting in notes where I'm giving you suggestions on how to make your comparison between Mako, who's the main character, and Solomon, and John in Perfect Example, the main character. Now, you do want to keep in mind this is a work of fiction, but it still has autobiographical elements, as you'll see if you read the interview with Asano that's in the folder for paper number 5. So it's not as directly autobiographical as Perfect Example, but it still has autobiographical element, and it's clearly based on elements of Asano's own life, as you'll see when you read the sources that I posted in Blackboard. So in paper 5, you're making your comparison between Perfect Example, which you've already written about. You've already researched it for paper number 4. So what does that mean? And I'll talk about this more in upcoming videos where I talk about the structure of the paper, which is on the directions. So please read those over carefully. You should retain as much about Porcelino from paper 4 as you can. So that means reusing paragraphs, reusing quotations, reusing the sources. Now, when you do that, you want to make sure you make corrections. You'll see when you get your papers back this week that I've edited them, not only by making suggestions as to how to make a comparison to Solomon, but also what to keep from paper number 4, what to change, what to edit, what to fix. So that's been part of my editing and grading process for paper number 4, because again, I didn't tell you this ahead of time, but 4 is basically the graded draft, the first 3 or 4 pages of paper number 5. And you'll notice paper number 5 should be 5 to 6 pages. So at least 5. If it goes longer than 6, that's okay, but you want to at least have 5 full pages, 5.5 pages. But now think about it. If you already wrote 3 pages for paper number 4, well, you've already got half of paper 5 done. If you did 4 pages, then you've got more than half of paper number 5 done. So they're totally connected. The major things you're going to change, though, and you may want to write this down before I show you the library database. You will need a new introduction. You won't be able to reuse the introduction from paper number 4 because paper number 4 was only on Porcelino. So that's not going to work as an introduction to paper number 5. You also would have to put in a new conclusion because, again, you're dealing with 2 books now and you're comparing them. So that would change. And obviously you're adding at least 2 new pages of material. I said a page, it depends on your length. Most of you had about 3.5 to 4 pages. So most of you are going to be adding at least 2 pages of new material on Salon. And if you look at the outline for this paper, I show you where to put in that new material and how to make the comparison between these 2 main characters. Now, there's a lot of other ways to compare them. As you notice, paper number 5 also has a much more specific, concrete question that's being asked, much like we did for the first few papers for the class. So anyway, read all that over, take a look at it. I'm going to do separate videos that are specifically on the book itself and on the structure of the paper, but I just want you to start thinking about that. And I also want you to realize, as I mentioned, that you've already started this paper. And so a few of you had said, when are we going to do the big final paper? We already started it. That was paper number 4. And so paper number 5 is an extension and an expansion of it. I do that every time I teach 102. I'm always trying to find a way to make the last paper manageable. And so that's what I've done with paper number 4. That's also why you'll notice paper number 5 is weighted much more heavily than any of the other papers that we did, because you're using all that material from 4. And now with this last paper for the class, you should be building on everything you learned all semester for citations, for structure, for use of quotations, for analysis that we've done in all our other papers, again, based on my comments and my feedback to your essays over the course of the semester. Now, one other thing I'll mention before I jump into showing you how to use the database to find a source on Perfect Example, a new one for this paper in the databases. Do not wait to do paper 5 the day before it's due. It's really not possible. It's got too many moving parts. You've got to incorporate material from the Porcelino paper. You've got to incorporate the new sources from Salon and on Inio Asano. So this is not the paper to leave till the day before. I know that you have a lot of other responsibilities, but this is the major grade for the class. So I'd ask you to try to put your focus on this one as you're working on it, because there's just more to it. And there's more use of sources. And as I said, there's just more moving parts to paper number 5. So this is not one to leave to the last minute. It's a little bit too hard to manage. And it's not designed to be written at the last minute. It is really designed to be, again, built on paper 4, and then slowly start adding on to paper number 4 as you develop paper number 5. Okay. So with that said, I'm going to do a screen share, and I'm going to show you, in addition to the sources on Inio Asano that you're going to need for paper number 5, which are already in the folder. So that's already on the directions. There's a new folder for paper number 5, and you can take a look at that on your own. I'm not going to talk about that in this video because I want to talk about one aspect of the directions that's a little bit different. So I'm going to go into one of the sections of the class. If you see a different due date, this may not be the section that you're in. So just keep that in mind as I go through this. I'm just going to take one of them since you all have the same directions. And I'm going to go into Blackboard, and I'm going to show you what's in there. I'm just picking section 15 because, like I said, all 4 of my classes are doing the same assignment. So I'm going to use this one since it's at the top of the list. So just if you're in section 15, this is the correct due date. If you're not in section 15, you have a different due date because I do stagger my classes, as you know by this point. So you're in here in the readings, quizzes, and writing assignments folder. Got paper number 5. I'll do a separate video where I specifically go through those directions piece by piece, but you can do that on your own. You've got these new resources on Asano and on Salon. So I have a short piece on what Japanese comics are. So that's what manga, that's what the word is. It's referring to these Japanese comics. And so I've got a little 3-page article from Casey Brianza, and she talks a little bit about what they are, how they were developed. And then these 2 are pieces on Salon. Now there's 2 different types. The Tom Spielman one is an essay that he wrote about the book and how he related to the musical elements of it. Okay, so that's an essay about the book, whereas the Bridget Alverson piece is an interview with Asano. There's not a lot of interviews with him. He's really well known in Japan. He's had some success here in the United States and in North America generally. This book particularly was really popular when it came out. There's a movie that's based on it that was, I think, only released in Japan. I haven't seen an English translation of it recently available, but there is a film version, so it's very popular in Japan. And there's even a sequel to it. If you go to his publisher's website, which is Viz Media, and you go to the page for this book, there's a short sequel that's available on the website to show what happens to Maiko 10 years after the events of the book. So that's all stuff you can take a look at. And again, in the directions I mentioned, how many of these sources to use and how to use them in the Asano part of your paper. But I do mention that for this one, because I want you to get more practice in using sources from the database, we're also going to be adding one more source on Porcelino's Perfect Example. And I mentioned that I want you to find a book review of Perfect Example because I want you to find what some other writers have said about this book. Now that you've already written about it, you'll be able to quote from one of those writers, one of those reviews in this new version of the Porcelino sections of your paper. So you're going to be finding one article from the library database. And I would do this right away. This is probably the easiest step of paper number 5, is finding this new article on Porcelino. And I'm doing this also because I want you to be aware of how to use the library database for your other classes, especially if you've never used it before. So I'm going to show you that now. So like I said, if you need to, pause this video, get your pen and paper out, get your notebook out, get your tablet out, and here's how to use the library database. Even if you've used it before, I'd like you to take a look at this part, at least the first half of this section of the video, so you can see what database I want you to use. So as you start thinking about getting into your other classes, not just here at Harper, but wherever it is that you're going to transfer to if you're going on to finish your 4-year degree somewhere else, here is how to use the database. Now, any school you would go to after Harper is going to have databases like this. Every college, every university, library has databases that are used for research. I use these databases all the time, especially for the work and the research that I do. So I'm always in the database trying to find articles, trying to find additional research for material that I'm working on. So here's how you get started. Look up the Harper Library, Harper College Library, and then you want to go to the Harper Library main page. And here it is. So I'm here now. I just typed in Harper Library into my search engine. I use Google Chrome. And then here I am on the main page. Now, when you're on the Harper page here, the main Harper Library page, look for where it says research. Okay, so where it says research, you're going to notice there's all these other links. You want to click on databases. Okay, so that's the third one down. Go to databases and click on it. Now, if you're already logged into the Harper portal, which I am, so I've got my portal, as you can see, open because I was just in Blackboard showing you those directions, you're not going to have to give it your sign-in information. Now, if you're not in the Harper portal, it is going to ask you for your username and the password that you would use to get into your portal such as when you're registering for classes. Okay, so it's the same thing. So usually when we're off campus like this, if you're not already logged into the portal, it does ask you to log in, or it'll ask you for your name and password before it lets you into these databases. Now, again, in my case, I'm already logged in. So the database that you'll want to use is in this list. These databases are listed by discipline or subject area. So let's say, for example, before I show you the database we're going to use for this paper, let's say that you were writing a paper for your psych class and your professor says to you, I want you to find some articles from the psychology database on the Harper Library website. Well, you'd go to P and you'd go here to psych articles. There's also one called Psych Info. And I think either one is useful. I know when I've had students using these databases for their paper, Psych Articles is where they started from. They've also used Psych Info. Let's say you had an art history class. Well, then you got to go back alphabetically to A, and then you'd look for the art databases. If you were in a music class and you needed music references and research, here's music and performing arts under M. So these are all alphabetical. Now, in our case, for English, we typically use the MLA database. You know, we use MLA citation format, as you know very well by now for your papers. So we typically use the MLA International Bibliography, okay, when we're working on essays. Now, unfortunately for this one, for Asano and for Porcellino, there's really not much in the database, right? There's just not much in there on them, on the MLA database. But for our purposes, what I want you to do to find your additional Porcellino source, so let me pause and stress this. You're not looking for a source on Inio, Asano, and Salon in the database, okay? I've already given you those sources, and there's really not much on him because he's a newer writer. But you do need to find one other source on Porcellino, and to do that, you got to click on Academic Search Complete, okay? So it's the first one alphabetically on the list. It's under letter A, Academic Search Complete. What this does, it's typically a good one to start from because it scours all the databases and it finds you information on your topic from all the different databases. In fact, it does it so much that it can be almost overwhelming. So when you have a topic, as I just mentioned, like something from psych or music or social science or history, whatever it is you're researching, I normally recommend going to the specific database. But in this case, because I want you to get some practice with this, and also because, as I said, there's not a lot on Porcellino in the MLA database. There's only one article that's currently listed in there. I'm just going to have you use Academic Search Complete. So once you're here and you see this thing that says EBSCO host, you know, it's asking you, as you can see here, to please enter your search term. So here's what you should enter. And just let me back up here for a second. Just remember, I got to the database list. I went to Academic Search Complete, which is going to go through all these databases. And now here I am in the search box. And what you should type in is John Porcellino, Perfect Example, because we want to find one review of his book, one review of Perfect Example. So let's see what happens. Let's put it in the search term and see what comes up. Sometimes it'll take a second. It depends how fast your computer is. You know, that wasn't too bad. Sometimes it'll take longer. It's also sometimes dependent maybe on the time of day that you're logging on. Now you'll notice how many sources did we find? 4. Okay, there's 4 of them here. There's 4 reviews of Perfect Example by John Porcellino in the database. Now, of the 4, one of them is harder to get because it's not immediately accessible. So let me show you some little shortcuts for these databases. If you know that you want to find an article right away, that you don't want to have to request it through the library, because they can get you any article that you need. If you're in a class and you do this search and you see that, okay, the first few are available. So in other words, for these first 3, they have them available as PDFs or as HTML texts. That means you can click on any one of these and immediately read it. Now, there are some articles you may find in these databases that say this: request this item through interlibrary loan, which means you can request it, but it'll take anywhere from 48 to 72 hours or so to get it. So you put in the request, the library gets it. I'm not going to show you how to do that with this one because you're not going to need to do that for this assignment. But you can make a request and they will get you not only the article, but if there's books that you need, they will also be able to get you books from other libraries. That sometimes takes a little bit longer. And it's a little more tricky now because, you know, we're not on campus and you'd have to go to campus to pick it up. That's why I haven't asked you to use any any print book sources for these papers, because I know that's a little difficult right now in terms of getting these kinds of resources. So I've stuck, as you notice, for this whole class, just to electronic sources so that you can work from home as much as you can. But one of the shortcuts around this, you can limit the search function. If you look over here on the left-hand side of the screen where it says full text, if you only want to see sources that you can immediately download and read, then click on full text, because that's going to give you ones that you can immediately read. So let's do that. You can also limit it by publication year. Now, because Porcelain is a relatively recent writer, I've let it stay open from, pretty far. I can actually even expand this from let's say we wanted to do 2001 to 2020. And we'll see if there's any more that come up here as far as reviews of his book. It's still only 4 reviews, so it really hasn't made any difference. But full text, if we click on that box, is going to give us only these 3. Okay, so in other words, I'm basically showing you here, you got to pick one of these 3 reviews and quote at least one line from it that explains, maybe in your introduction, like what have other writers said about Perfect Example? You've written about it now. You've given your opinion on it in paper form, but now I want you to see what some other writers have said, and not the writers that we already use for paper form. Okay, you can still use those sources, but again, we're adding one additional Porcelino resource for this essay, and it's going to have to be one of these 3 reviews. So now, which one to pick? That's up to you. They're all pretty similar, but let's say I pick number 2 here. My recommendation would be, anytime you have a choice between an HTML link and a PDF, I would go with the PDF. The PDF is usually easier to read and cite, but it's going to have the same text. So let's say we were going to use the second one. Click on it, and let me show you some other shortcuts that are in here. Again, it might take a second for this to open. So what it does is it gives you the original print version of the article. Now, these are short articles, they're reviews. If you're in another class where they're asking you to find much longer academic articles, they could be anywhere from 15 to 20 pages. Now, we're just using shorter ones because you already have plenty of other resources and research material to use for this last paper. But here we have the review. So you can read this over. You would cite it in the same way that we cited everything else for the class. So all the citation rules that we've talked about from paper number 1 on, that still apply here. But the database is really helpful, and let me show you why. Aside from the fact that you have you have access to all these resources, I'll tell you something. This is a lot easier than when I was your age and I was in college, when you had to go to the library. I mean, we had computers, obviously, we had email, but we were able to do some searches within our campus library. But getting articles was difficult. You still had to go to the library to get them. You didn't have these online resources. So if only 30 years ago, when I was a first-year student in college up in New Hampshire, a very, very cold place in the winter, if only I had these kind of resources where I wouldn't have had to walk across campus in my Chuck Taylor sneakers to go to the library in the middle of a snowy winter. It's like a dream come true. I say this every time I show these databases because they're so easy to use. At any rate, here's the article, right? So let me show you what's here. You can print it out. That's what these icons are here. It's print. You can email it to yourself if you wanted to. That's more used if we're on campus and you find an article in the library itself when you're on their computers, then you can email it to your laptop or your tablet. You're going to be already doing this from your computer, so you probably don't need to email it to yourself. But there's also a section here, there's other links that we don't really need for this. But please make a note that there is a citation function in this database and in any library database you would use for any kind of research in other classes and at whatever the school you might be transferring to after you finish up at Harper. So if you want to see how to cite this, all you got to do is click on this little link. Again, I'm over here on the right-hand side of the screen. Click on it and watch this. This is pretty cool. It shows you every type of possible citation format you would probably use for a college paper or for any kind of research you're doing. Now, we're using MLA, but as I've said to you before, you're going to be in classes where they're asking for APA. Well, here it is, an APA format. In some history courses, they use Chicago style, which is right here. I have no idea what Harvard Australian style is. I've only ever seen it in this database, so maybe in Australia, Harvard has its own citation format. I don't know. But here also is the one we're using. So we use MLA. So how do you cite it? Well, here is a version of how to cite it. The only thing that's left off here, you'll notice, is the name of the author. So that's the only drawback. Oh, actually, I'm sorry, for this article, there's no author listed. That's why it's listed this way. That you may be wondering, why is there no author listed? Well, there's no author listed because they're only publishing it under the name of the book. So this is all you would have to cut and paste for that particular entry, for that particular resource, okay? Now let me go to another one and let me show you the other one, because that's kind of an unusual one because it doesn't list the name of the author. Not all magazines do, by the way. Not all sources do. There are many magazines that are kind of done and written collectively, so they're attributed to their editors and not to single authors. I'll go to this other one just to kind of show you an example of how different these things can look when you're in the databases. So let's say you read that review, you didn't like it that much. You go to this one. Well, let's look at the same thing. How would we cite this particular source? Well, here we go back to the citation function, right? Scroll down. You want to get the MLA one because that's the one we're using. Now, this one has an author. It's Stephen Weiner is the author for this one. And so you'll see his article here. He did a book review of this for Library Journal. And this is more traditional because, again, because this one has an author listed, you're just going to cut and paste that into your works cited if you were going to use this one. Same thing for the other couple of entries that are here. So pick one of these, use the database for it. The other thing I want to show you, though, is that, again, in another class, if you forget everything I've tried to show you about how to cite your sources correctly and properly, if you click on MLA 8th edition, it gives you an overview of how to use MLA formatting. It's every type of article citation you could use, every type of book chapter. It's a really, really good overview. It has all kinds of other resources here. So again, I'm a big fan of these databases. I use them all the time when I'm doing research. In fact, I'll even show you something on the way out that I always thought was pretty cool about these databases, but you're going to find one of these articles. So let me go back and sum this up real quick. So to use the database, remember, start from the library website, go to the list. We're using the first one called Academic Search Complete from the library. When you click on it, it's going to take you in here. You're just going to put in John Porcellino and perfect example. You're going to get to this page. You're going to want full text because you don't want to have to do a library request for a short resource like this. You've got 3 to choose from. So there you go. Now, these databases are fun because if I go back to this list, what I like to do, I guess this would be called vanity searching, I think is what we sometimes call this. In the MLA database, what I always like to see is which of my articles are listed there, because as we publish articles, they get listed in these databases. Not all of them. It depends on what journal they're published in and when they're published and some other factors. But if you go into the MLA database and put my name in, you'll see some of my articles. You know, these are more recent ones. This is one from 2018. I really like that. It was a good article. Another recent one, my book from a couple of years ago, this article on Edie Fake, Gaylord Phoenix that I wrote, almost 10 years ago now. This has nothing to do with me. It's just another person with my last name on Irish literature, which is nice to see. Cremens is of course an Irish name, so this must be some other distant relative in the family who also writes on literature. My dissertation is listed here and a couple of other older articles. This article actually is from 2003, which means it's almost as old as most of you. So that's or maybe older than some of you, or pretty close to it. So anyway, that's why these databases are fun. As we as writers publish new articles, academic articles specifically, they get listed in these databases, which is why when I'm starting off on research, I always start from, in my case, either Academic Search Complete, excuse me, or the MLA database, because I want to get started and find what other people have written about the topic that I'm writing on, so I can quote from them and I can cite them, which of course is the whole point of what this class has been all semester, are those citations. Okay, so there's a lot there on the databases. Let me stop that share. If you have any questions on this part of of paper number 5, please ask me. It's pretty easy to use the database. I want you to have a little bit of practice on using it for this one review article, again, that you're going to find on Perfect Example. In the next video, I'll talk more about Salon in itself. So I'll shift gears a little bit and I'll talk a little bit more about Inio Asano and Japanese comics and Salon, which you're going to notice if you've already read it or if you've started reading it, similar themes. The main characters are very similar. There's a lot of music in here. The Mako character in Salon is also dealing with some challenges particularly sadness and depression, that are similar to John in perfect examples. So there's a lot of things to compare. You can compare the artwork in these two books, the themes, again, the use of music, the way the characters kind of find their different friend groups. In this case, in Salon, the main characters are also kind of transitioning out of their college and high school years. So similar, very similar books, which is why I wanted to pair them together for the end of the class for paper number 5. Okay. So if you have any questions, please send me an email. I'll be happy to answer it. I'm very excited to see what you think of this book. As we discuss it, I'll be doing another Zoom check-in this week, so we can talk a little bit about it if you'd like to ask me any questions about it. And in the meantime, I'll be finishing up paper number 4, sending those back to you this week, so you can use my edits for that as you start working on our last paper for the class before we do the revision in early May. So please email me with any questions. If you have anything else, let me know. And if not, I'll see you in the next video. Bye.